The plaster crumbled away like ancient skin as Charlotte pulled at the loose wallpaper in her grandmother's cottage. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through grimy windows, and the musty smell of decades filled her nostrils. She'd been putting off clearing out Nana Whitmore's belongings for months, but the estate agent had been quite firm the house needed to be emptied before it could go on the market. Behind a particularly stubborn section of rose-patterned paper, her fingers found something solid, a wooden box, no larger than a cigarette packet, wedged between the wall studs. Charlotte worked it free, noting its intricate carved surface and the peculiar warmth it radiated, despite having been sealed away for who knew how long. The tiny brass latch gave way with surprising ease. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a single envelope. Her name was written across it, in elegant script, Miss Charlotte Whitmore. But it was the postmark that made her blood run cold, dated exactly 2 years in the future. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter within. Dearest Charlotte, by now you will have found this box, just as I knew you would. What follows may seem impossible, but I implore you to believe. On Thursday next, at precisely 2:30, you will witness Mrs. Pemberton from number 47 fall on the High Street. She will slip on the wet leaves outside Hartwell's bakery. Do not let her go alone to hospital. Insist upon accompanying her. The doctor will miss the signs of her stroke otherwise. This is only the beginning. With love from someone who cares, a friend. Charlotte read the letter 3 times before the words truly sank in. Thursday, that was tomorrow. Mrs. Pemberton lived just down the lane. Charlotte had known her since childhood. The whole thing was preposterous, yet something about the handwriting nagged at her. It seemed almost familiar, though she couldn't place where she'd seen it before. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her handbag, telling herself she'd throw it away once she got home. But as she locked up the cottage that evening, she found herself glancing at her watch. 2:30 tomorrow seemed both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. The next morning brought grey skies and a persistent drizzle that turned the fallen autumn leaves into a treacherous carpet along the high street. Charlotte found herself lurking near Hartwell's bakery at 2:25, feeling utterly ridiculous. She'd nearly talked herself into leaving twice when she spotted Mrs. Pemberton's familiar purple coat approaching from the direction of the post office. At exactly 2:30, the elderly woman's foot caught on a slick patch of leaves. Charlotte was already moving, catching Mrs. Pemberton's arm before she could fall properly. "Oh, my dear, how clumsy of me," Mrs. Pemberton gasped, steadying herself against Charlotte's shoulder. "These blasted leaves, the council really ought to clear them more regularly." "Are you quite all right?" Charlotte asked, studying the older woman's face. Was there something odd about her expression? A slight slackness around the mouth. "Just a bit dizzy, I think. Perhaps I should sit down for a moment." Charlotte's pulse quickened. "Let me drive you to the surgery, just to be safe." 20 minutes later, Dr. Matthews was explaining to a grateful Charlotte that she'd been absolutely right to bring Mrs. Pemberton in immediately. The signs of a minor stroke were subtle but unmistakable, and catching it so quickly would make all the difference to her recovery. That evening, Charlotte sat at her kitchen table staring at the letter. It was impossible, yet it had happened exactly as described. She checked the envelope again, no return address, no postmark save for that impossible date 2 years hence. The second letter arrived on Saturday morning, slipped through her front door sometime during the night. Again, no postmark, no indication of how it had gotten there. Charlotte, well done with Mrs. Pemberton, you're beginning to understand. On Monday morning, at 9:15, the scaffolding outside the library will collapse. Young Timothy Fletcher will be walking beneath it. You must delay him, any excuse will do. Perhaps you might ask him to help you carry something heavy from your car. Trust in this, as you trusted before. Your devoted correspondent. Charlotte spent Sunday in a state of nervous agitation. Timothy Fletcher was the baker's apprentice, barely 18, and always cheerful despite working brutal early hours. The thought of him being hurt by falling scaffolding made her feel quite sick. Monday morning found her parked outside the library at 8:30, a box of her grandmother's old books in her boot, a convenient excuse should she need one. At 8:40, Timothy appeared, whistling as he walked down the street toward the bakery. "Timothy," she called out, popping her boot. "You couldn't possibly help me with these books, could you? They're frightfully heavy." The young man's face lit up. "Course I can, Miss Whitmore. What are you doing with them?" As Timothy lifted the box from her car, Charlotte heard a tremendous crash behind them. They turned to see the scaffolding in a twisted heap on the pavement, right where Timothy would have been walking. "Bloody hell," Timothy breathed. "That could have killed someone." Charlotte's hands were shaking as she thanked him and sent him on his way. 2 predictions, 2 disasters averted. But as she stood looking at the debris, a terrible thought occurred to her. How could anyone have known these things would happen unless... The 3rd letter was waiting when she returned home that afternoon. "My dear Charlotte, I can see the doubt in your mind even from here. You're wondering how these predictions are possible. Who could know such things? The answer is simpler and more terrible than you imagine. But first, you must understand what happens when we try to change too much, too quickly. Tomorrow evening, just after sunset, Mr. Hartwell will chase a thief from his shop. The man will run into the road just as the evening bus rounds the corner. You will have a choice: save the thief, or save the bus driver who will swerve to avoid him and crash into the lamppost. You cannot save both. Choose wisely. Some futures are written in stone. With deepest regret, your friend." Charlotte read the letter until the words blurred. This wasn't like the others. This wasn't about prevention, but about choosing who lived and who died. She spent a sleepless night wrestling with an impossible decision. The next evening, she positioned herself across from Hartwell's bakery as the sun dipped behind the church spire. At 7:15, she heard shouting from inside the shop, then saw a young man burst through the door with Mr. Hartwell in pursuit. "Stop! Thief!" the baker bellowed. The thief, barely more than a boy, really looked desperately left and right before bolting into the road. Charlotte could see the bus approaching, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. The driver would have perhaps 2 seconds to react. Time seemed to slow as Charlotte made her choice. She stepped into the road herself, directly into the thief's path. The collision sent them both sprawling onto the tarmac as the bus thundered past, the driver never needing to swerve. But as Charlotte helped the dazed young man to his feet, she heard another sound: the screech of tires from the opposite direction. A car driving too fast, unable to stop in time. She shoved the thief toward the pavement, but there wasn't time to save herself. The impact threw her against the bakery window with a sickening crack. As consciousness faded, she heard someone screaming her name, though the voice seemed to come from very far away. Charlotte woke in hospital 3 days later with a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a head full of questions she couldn't answer. The doctor said she'd been extraordinarily lucky, a few inches either way, and the outcome could have been very different. But when she finally returned home, she found another letter waiting. "Charlotte, you saved them both, though not in the way I expected. Your resourcefulness has impressed even me, but your intervention has consequences, ripples spreading outward like stones thrown into still water. The future grows harder to see clearly now. There is something you must know about these letters, about who is writing them. Look for the journal hidden in your grandmother's writing desk, the secret compartment behind the 3rd drawer. Read it carefully, and you will begin to understand. The truth will hurt, my darling girl, but you must know it. With love always, your devoted brother." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. Marcus had been dead for 3 years, killed in a motorcycle accident on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She'd been the one to identify his body, the one to arrange his funeral. Marcus couldn't be writing these letters. Could he? She drove to the cottage with her heart hammering against her ribs. The writing desk sat in what had been her grandmother's study, a heavy Victorian monstrosity that had belonged to the family for generations. Charlotte had planned to donate it to charity, but now she examined it with new eyes. The third drawer stuck as she pulled it out, requiring considerable effort. Behind it, just as the letter had promised, was a narrow compartment she'd never noticed. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The first entry was dated 15th September, 1924. My name is Catherine Whitmore, and I fear I am going quite mad. The letters began arriving a fortnight ago, impossible messages from someone claiming to know my future. At first, I thought it must be some cruel jest, but the predictions, dear God, the predictions come true with terrifying accuracy. Charlotte's hands shook as she read. Catherine Whitmore, her great-grandmother, dead before Charlotte was born. The handwriting was different from the letters she'd been receiving, but the story was exactly the same. She read on, her horror growing with each entry. October 3rd, 1924, I saved Mrs. Fletcher from a terrible fall today, just as the letter instructed. But how could anyone have known she would trip on those loose cobblestones? October 15th, 1924, another prediction came true. Young William escaped that runaway horse because I delayed him with conversation. I am beginning to suspect these are not predictions at all, but memories. November, honest, 1924, I have made a terrible discovery. The letters are signed with my own Namino as I am now, but as I will be. The handwriting is mine, aged and changed by time I have yet to live. But how is this possible? Charlotte flipped frantically through the pages, searching for answers. November 20th, 1924. I understand now, though the knowledge brings no comfort. This house. There is something wrong with this house. Time moves strangely here, folding back upon itself like a serpent eating its own tail. I am not the first Catherine Whitmore to live these events, and I fear I will not be the last. The letters come from myself, from a future self trapped in an endless loop. Each time, I live this life, grow old, and find myself compelled to write the letters that will guide my younger self through the same events. But the loop never breaks. There is always another Catherine, another cycle. I have found journals from my predecessors, dozens of them, hidden throughout the house. Each one tells the same story with minor variations. We are all the same woman, living the same life, over and over, for reasons I cannot fathom. The journal's final entry was brief and chilling. December 15th, 1924. I have found a way to break the cycle, though the cost will be terrible. Tomorrow I will burn down the house with myself inside it. Perhaps if the cycle is broken through death, the next Catherine will be free. But even as I write this, I know it won't work. I can feel her already, the next Catherine, being born somewhere, waiting to grow up and move into this house and find these letters. Time is a circle here, and circles have no beginning and no end. If you are reading this, my dear girl, then you are me, and I am you, and we are all caught in the same terrible web. Run. Run as far and as fast as you can, and never look back. But I know you won't listen. I didn't listen either. Charlotte closed the journal with shaking hands. Catherine's great fire Shay remembered the family stories now. How her great-grandmother had died in a mysterious house fire in 1924, how the cottage had been rebuilt on the same foundations, how each generation of Whitmore women seemed drawn back to this place eventually. She stumbled outside into the garden, gasping for fresh air. The cottage loomed behind her, innocent-looking in the afternoon sun, but now she could feel something watching from its windows, waiting. Another letter was tucked under her windscreen wiper. Charlotte, you've read Catherine's journal. You know what we are echoes of the same soul, trapped in the same story. But knowing doesn't set you free, does it? You're still here, still reading my letters. The loop can be broken, but only through the ultimate sacrifice. One of us must choose to forget everything, not just the letters, not just the predictions, but all of it. Our entire identity must be surrendered. Only then can the cycle end. Tomorrow, at midnight, return to the cottage. In the cellar, behind the wine rack, you will find a door you've never noticed before. Beyond it lies the heart of this place, the source of our endless repetition. You must choose. Keep your memories and condemn another Charlotte to this fate, or sacrifice everything you are to set us all free. I know which choice I would make. I pray you are stronger than I was. All my love and all my sorrow. Charlotte Whitmore. Written in 2027. That night, Charlotte sat in her own kitchen, surrounded by family photographs and familiar objects, trying to memorize every detail. If she chose to break the cycle, all of this would be lost to her. She would wake tomorrow as an empty vessel, with no knowledge of who she had been or what she had sacrificed. But if she refused, another Charlotte would be born somewhere, would grow up and move into the cottage and find the first letter in the wall. The cycle would continue, as it had continued for a century. At midnight, she drove to the cottage for what she knew would be the last time. The key turned easily in the lock, as if the house were welcoming her home. The cellar was exactly as she remembered it from childhood: visit stone walls, wooden shelves lined with dusty wine bottles, the smell of earth and age. But now, looking with new eyes, she could see that the wine rack didn't quite fit against the far wall. Behind it, barely visible in the torchlight, was the outline of a door. The door opened at her touch, revealing a narrow staircase descending into absolute darkness. Charlotte descended slowly, her torch beam dancing off walls that seemed to shimmer and shift in the uncertain light. The staircase ended in a circular room carved from living rock. At its center sat an ornate writing desk, the twin of the one upstairs, but far older. Candles flickered in wall sconces that had no business being lit, and the air hummed with an energy that made her teeth ache. On the desk lay hundreds of letters in various hands, all addressed to different versions of herself. Charlotte Whitmore, Catherine Whitmore, Charlotte Margaret Whitmore, Catherine Rose Whitmore, dozens of names, all variations on the same theme, all the same woman, trapped in the same story. And there, in the chair behind the desk, sat an elderly woman with Charlotte's own face, lined with years and sorrow. "You came," the older Charlotte said, her voice carrying the weight of infinite exhaustion. "I wasn't certain you would. How long have you been here? Time doesn't work the same way in this place. I've been here since 1924, and since yesterday, and since the day I was born. I am Catherine, and I am you, and I am all the others who came before." She gestured to the letters. "Each cycle, I write the warnings. Each cycle, I hope this time will be different." But it never is. No, the loop always closes. The letters are always written. The cycle continues. The older Charlotte leaned forward. "But you can end it." The power that binds us, Eerie, feeds on continuity, on the endless repetition of the same events. But if one of us chooses to forget everything, to become truly no one, the pattern breaks. Yes, but you must understand this isn't death. It's worse. You will live, but you will be empty. No memories, no sense of self, no knowledge of what you've sacrificed. You'll be a ghost haunting your own life. Charlotte looked around the impossible room, at the candles that burned without wax, at the letters that chronicled 100 years of futile struggle. She thought of all the other Charlottes yet to be born, yet to discover the letters, yet to live through this same terrible revelation. "And if I refuse? Then you'll take my place at this desk. You'll write the letters to guide your younger self, and eventually a new Charlotte will be born to start the cycle again." The suffering continues. but at least you remain yourself." Charlotte closed her eyes. In her mind, she could see them all Catherine, with her Victorian dress and frightened eyes, the unnamed women who had come between, all the future Charlottes stretching into infinity. All of them trapped, all of them afraid, all of them facing this same impossible choice. Will I be happy if I forget? The older Charlotte's smile was infinitely sad. "I don't know. I've never been brave enough to find out." "Then I suppose it's time someone was." Charlotte reached for the nearest candle. As her fingers closed around it, the older woman began to fade like mist in sunlight. "Thank you," were her last words, barely a whisper on the still air. The flame touched the first letter, then the second. Within moments, the desk was ablaze, and the impossible fire spread to the walls, the ceiling, the very air itself. Charlotte felt herself dissolving, her memories scattering like ashes on an unfelt wind. The last thing she remembered was a name Charlotte, but she couldn't recall why it seemed important. Oliver Blackwood sneezed as he pulled away the last section of water-damaged wallpaper. The cottage had been a steal at auction, too good to be true, really, but the surveyor hadn't found anything seriously wrong with it. Just some old fire damage in the cellar, and a few quirks in the electrical system. His fingers found something solid behind the wall, a small wooden box wedged between the studs. Oliver worked it free, admiring the intricate carving on its surface. Inside, on faded velvet, lay a single envelope. His name was written across it in elegant script, Mr. Oliver Blackwood. But the postmark made him frown. It was dated 2 years in the future. He unfolded the letter with curious fingers. "Dearest Oliver, by now you will have found this box, just as I knew you would. What follows may seem impossible, but I implore you to believe." Outside, a woman walked past the cottage window without glancing in. She had no particular destination in mind, no pressing appointments or urgent errands. Her name, if anyone had asked, was Charlotte, though she couldn't have said why. She simply liked the sound of it. She paused for a moment outside the cottage gate, struck by an odd sense of déjà vu, then shrugged and continued on her way. Behind her, in the cottage window, Oliver Blackwood read his first impossible letter by the light of the afternoon sun. The wheel turned, as wheels do, finding new tracks in the old groove.